Welcome to Gorilla Sports Off Field. I am Liv Moods, and in just a moment, joined by Brandon Krisztal. And this is presented by Trusted American Mortgage. Trusted American salary-based mortgage consultants want to help you get into a better interest rate and lower your monthly payments. So head to trustedamerican.com to see how they can help you save some money today.
Hello and welcome in.
Please do not leave your luggage unattended on the station.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome in, everybody, to a Gorilla Sports Off Field. I am Liv Moods. That is Brandon Krisztal, and we are going to talk about a few different things today. I think off the top, we're going to talk a little bit of Shedeur and Travis Hunter. We've got some clips from their not pro day,
Showcase.
their CU showcase. Okay, do not call it a pro day. We've got some clips from that. We're going to talk a little bit about, you mentioned the Titans canceled this week, which was expected. Explain that a little bit to me because I'm not understanding.
So this time of year, you'll have your pro days, showcases, and the Buffs, I don't know if it was intentional or not, but ended up going last, if you will, in the order of when Alabama went or Ohio State or any of the schools. And even when the Big 12 did theirs and there's regional ones and all of this. And so now it's just about individual workouts or individual meetings or, even those Zoom meetings for teams are allowed to bring 30 players in by league rule that the team pays for. If you live here, like Gunnar Helm, who went to Cherry Creek, or Terrence Ferguson, who he played at Oregon, and he's from here as well, you can just drive over to the NFL team in your city. So like the Dolphins could host 30 or 40 more kids probably than the 30 if they wanted. And I'm using the Dolphins as an example. The Rams and Chargers, same thing.
Yeah.
If it's deemed that team is close enough that it's local, and I don't know how far that extends. So like if you're in Bakersfield, are you too close?
In the limits.
But like San Fran or LA, are you just kind of in no man's land? Versus if you're in Pueblo or Fort Collins, that might still count as the Broncos. But does Cheyenne? I don't know. But point being, like Gunnar Helm went for a visit and he just drove over, so that didn't count against, say, Quinshawn Judkins, who's going to be there this week. So each team gets 30. And sometimes you want to know, is it a smoke screen? Are they bringing this guy in so that the team in front of us thinks, oh, they must like him too if they're bringing him in? It seems doing their due diligence. But then teams also have the individual workout that they'll schedule or an individual dinner or whatever it may be. We saw where the Browns, with their owner in town, their GM, their head coach, and other members of their staff took both Travis and Shedeur to dinner the night before the pro day. But so then they didn't, I don't know if there was also a private workout. We didn't hear about that. I don't think we really heard about the Sean Payton, Bo Nix private workout until he was drafted.
Yeah.
But that came a day after his pro day. So it's like pro day ends. Instead of exhaling, they're like, Sean Payton threw a bunch of stuff at him, as we know, famously. All signs are pointing to the Titans taking Cam Ward. They can't come out and say it for a couple of reasons. One, just in case somebody blows them away with a trade offer. There's that part. And also, it's a big TV show. I know that sounds silly, but this is something that maybe Brian Callahan, the head coach in Tennessee, has a little more experience with because he was on Zach Taylor's staff when they took Joe Burrow. And I get that it was the COVID draft, but everybody knew they were taking Joe Burrow.
Right.
They couldn't come out 3 weeks and say, hey, we're taking Joe Burrow, so don't bother us. It started to get out there. So that's why even when you see the draft people talk, they're like, it looks like the Titans are taking Cam Ward. So they didn't want to waste Travis's time. They didn't want to waste Shedeur's time.
I respect.
There's also signs that indicate Shedeur could end up being teammates with our pal Shelby Harris in Cleveland.
You think that's a good fit for him?
I think wherever he goes, it's a good fit football-wise. We talked about this the other day, Scott and Nate and I, for a little bit. I think that Kevin Stefanski's a good offensive coach. I think he's a good head coach. He's won Coach of the Year twice. We know that the Browns are the Browns. The man is always kind of getting their own way. But you do have Myles Garrett back, and so that's going to make any defense better. We don't know what their quarterback situation is other than Kenny Pickett. And so
I just think they have like bad voodoo over there.
It feels like it. And
I personally would hate to go there because it just feels like they've got like this negative aura at all times.
I'm not really
sure
Shedeur, why.
I mean, Shedeur does say, I'll change the culture. Whichever culture I'm in, I'll change it. So maybe that's what the Browns need.
Well, I'm going to throw this at you because I heard this about the Giants and I brought it up because Nate threw this out there. And so I will relay Nate's theory. And there's one similar with the Giants, but easier for the Browns to execute. The Browns can take Travis at 2. There's nothing stopping the Browns from trading the second pick of the second round, as well as some future, other stuff, to a team in the late teens or even the Broncos at 20 to jump up and get Shador also. And then you've got Shador and Travis together. You want to remake a culture in Cleveland. If those dudes can handle hanging out in Jackson, Mississippi, I'm pretty sure they can get through 5 months a year during the football season in Cleveland. That's the thing is, and we could have Shelby come in here and talk to us about it.
Yeah, I'd love that.
But Shelby is spending his time here. Cleveland's one of those cities where guys aren't necessarily there in January, February, and March. Well, if you're just following Bo Nix's social media, really his wife's, Cortland Sutton's, we know that people are in Denver.
Right.
Christian McCaffrey will come to town.
People love Denver.
Yeah, certainly SoCal, Arizona, Florida.
Right.
We get all that. Cleveland, Buffalo, those just aren't cities that really have a strong presence once your season's over, January, February, March.
Yeah.
But then you get into April, and April's okay just about anywhere. April, May, and then into early June, and then you're not back until training camp. And so then, is Cleveland the best city to play in during the year? I think the downtown's a little underrated in terms of its food scene.
I actually loved,
They've got a casino right downtown.
Yeah, I like it.
But you can, if you really want to change a culture, and Travis seems like a pretty simple dude. Like, I don't think he's out. I say simple, like he wants to fish, he wants to play video games, and he wants to do football.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think he's going to care if it's snowing outside in December.
I would love to watch them together. I think it'd be great. It'd be more fun.
If
the
you're the Browns,
storyline would continue for sure.
If you're the Browns, is it worth it to trade, call it this year's second rounder?
Yeah.
And next year's number one? Just those two things right there for Shador at 20. Because if I'm the Broncos, I'm certainly listening to that. Like, we'll take 20 to go back to 35. And then also we get next year's first rounder. Sign me up.
Well, I think what the Browns have been missing for a very long time is like continuity. You've got it in Shador and Travis right there. They've played with each other. They know each other very well. So it's a risk for sure, but the bar's pretty low for Cleveland.
Yeah.
In terms of if you're looking at their last 5 years.
They made the playoffs 2 years ago.
It always feels like there's a letdown at the end of their season, whether it's in the playoffs or not. So I think at this point you're willing to take some risks if it means 5 years from now you're a contender.
And there's certainly a theory. The Deshaun Watson contract is what the albatross, but there's a theory in the NFL that if you don't have that quarterback right, and there's one you like, draft them, keep drafting quarterbacks until you get it right.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't gotten it right in Cleveland since Bernie Kosar was there, I guess. They were talking in the mid 80s.
Wait, look at that comment.
I like the Matrix edition. Yeah, that's seems about right. Snow Wolf nails it.
Is it because it's a leather jacket?
Yeah, and kind of just the whole vibe. You can't really even tell that it's a hood. It looks like it's a big collar. Like I can look.
That's actually true. It is giving collar. This is a hood, you
right?
guys.
It's a hood, but you're not going to wear that. Well,
I mean,
hey, that does not work for Mike Vrabel. Did you see?
That's even worse.
Yeah, Little Black Riding Hood.
Wow, that is Little Black.
That's why she was called Little Red Riding Hood, because of the color of her hood,
right?
Not because she was red.
BK is.
I was not trying to say anything racial at all. I don't want this to be misconstrued. You're wearing a black.
Working with BK is one of the funnier things of my life.
I don't know if you caught that video, Mike Vrabel, and this is how you know that this isn't your dad's Patriots. This isn't Mike Vrabel's Bill Belichick Patriots. He puts his first team, like nothing goes out of the head coach on team stuff unless you want it out there, obviously.
Of course.
That's why we almost see nothing from Sean Payton ever from the Broncos, other than, hey, what'd you think of your new free agents? Kind of thing. But their first ever team meeting for OTAs this week, and that's out all 3 minutes and 22 seconds with him kind of going through the lists of stuff. One is which don't have your hoods up in meetings. So
I actually think that's a fair rule. It does read disrespectful.
He was funny too. He's like, and I couldn't tell if he meant in the off season or the regular season. He's like, hey, if you're running late, just let us know. Things happen. Life happens. It's like 4th, 5th time, then we're going to start having a real conversation. I don't know if that means like for your Wednesday team meeting, if you're running late, but there's an acknowledgement. And maybe this is where you talk about players, coaches. He played and he had sick kids and he had this and that, right? Life does happen.
Of course.
Obviously the way you budget your time and planning ahead and all of that, but I at least appreciate that acknowledgement. And then he also talked about cell phones. He's like, put your cell phone away, keep it in your bag. When you're working out, keep it away from the workout. Don't do a set.
Sounds
check
like
your
he's
phone.
talking to like high schoolers.
But he's like,
don't be late. Don't be on your phone. Don't put your hood on.
And with the phone too, he's like, don't cough when your phone's ringing. We all have cell phones. We all know when it's ringing. Like, it's not that important.
These are very specific call outs, meaning they probably happened many times.
Sure.
Before.
And obviously he had all those years, he was an assistant at Ohio State. He was obviously with the Texans for a bunch of years, running the Titans. Last year he was around the Browns all year. He's seen plenty, and he was a player for a long time. And so I think Mike Vrabel would be fun to play for. Like, if we're ranking coaches that you would enjoy playing for, he doesn't seem as crazy as Dan Campbell, but you can tell that he understands what it means to be a player, because he was a really good one for a long time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of players, let's wrap things up on the subject of Shedeur and Travis Hunter.
Who the Patriots would love, but I don't.
Travis ain't gonna be there. Speaking of the Patriots, they probably would love to have both of them. Because they're in
they got Drake May.
I
think they're bought in on Drake May.
And they should be.
But Travis at 4, he's not getting there.
Speaking of Travis, did you talk to Champ Bailey about Travis Hunter?
I talked to both Champ Bailey and Field Yates separately, but Field Yates was there doing the show with ESPN, and so was Champ. But we should never have a Hall of Famer take the back seat to anyone. And Champ, when I saw him a couple times during the year, especially the first time he was here on Ring of Fame Day, because he was wearing his gold jacket. He said that I'd play Travis at corner, because I think his brain goes to corner.
Yeah.
And if you listen here, Champ, I think is kind of come around to where I think the Browns are, based on what Andrew Berry said at the combine, which is I would start Travis at wide receiver. But this is Champ, and I
expected. When you have 2 potential first-round picks and then a load of other guys that are going to get drafted, I expect a crowd like this. I expect all these GMs and coaches to be involved and interested in these kids. It's great because I got to see Travis Hunter up close, moving around. I mean, he's had a great career up to this point. I'm really anxious to see what he does at the next level.
When you came in town earlier this year during the season, I asked you where would you play him, and I think the corner in your head said corner. But have you changed your mind at all? If you're drafting, if you're Cleveland, if you're the Giants, the Pats, I'm not sure he gets past 4 really. Where would you start him?
Honestly, I want to see him do both. I hope he get a shot to do both. The reason I say corner is because he's such a superior athlete. So to find a guy with that kind of length, that kind of heart for the game, and that athleticism, ball skills, it's a rare combination of skills. And he has all that. But when I watch him run routes, I'm like, oh, dang, this kid is a great route runner, great hands. So it's hard to overlook that. So if I had to pick one, I'd pick corner because it's just less dependent. He can go have a great game without having any stats. Right. But at wide receiver, you need the ball. So there's a lot that goes along with that. But for me, I would hope he gets in a situation where he can display all his talents.
Love it. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, Travis Hunter is exceptionally talented. And I think I was able to be on the sidelines for a Boulder game. And this holds true in any sport, but in person, the value and the athleticism of Travis Hunter is a lot more notable and clear cut than when you watch him on TV. I mean, of course, we all watch him on TV and we know he's great, but he's a freak of nature in the best way possible.
It's funny you say that, because I was standing kind of behind Shedeur during the throwing session. I got the Giants people right next to me. Kevin Stefanski was real close. Travis Hunter comes up, says hi to them. Sean Payton was kind of standing right here by me. A guy from the Bears is there. And even though you're watching Jimmy Horn, who's definitely an NFL wide receiver, LeJontay Wester, NFL wide receivers, those guys are going to be in the league. Will Shepard's going to be in the league. When Travis was out there, whatever route he was running, and he did a lot of stuff just kind of close. He didn't get deep too much at maybe once, a little more down the field, but everything was inside of 20 yards. You could see the athleticism and the differentiation, even though those guys are world-class type athletes, certainly NFL caliber athletes. You could just see the quick twitch stuff and the fact that he's, so fluid in and out of his breaks, and he chose to catch the ball without gloves on. I asked Champ, when's the last time you didn't wear gloves? He said high school, because I couldn't afford them. Yeah, there's a difference. Travis Hunter really is a freak of nature. Yeah. And so much so that he is everyone's number 1 wide receiver on their wide receiver board. Mel Kiper said that early, but Field Yates has him number 1 overall as his overall pick. And we'll hear from Field here in a second. But as receivers, number 1 as corner, I think he's no lower than 3. But Champ's point about corners can go in and have an impact because you don't need the ball.
Yeah.
If Travis goes to Cleveland and Kenny Pickett's throwing him the ball, I mean, what good is it going to do to be out every down at wide receiver?
Right. Absolutely. Well, let's hear from Field Yates on his thoughts about Travis Hunter.
Ask you about Shador, the quarterback. Travis Hunter, I'm sure you have him pretty high on your board. Number one is the number one player.
By himself.
If you were just going to be a receiver or just a corner, how high is he on both of those? Because I've heard he's top 3 in usually each.
Yeah, I would say that at worst he'd be third on the big board, probably second though in both scenarios. If he was just a cornerback or just a wide receiver, I think, and it's nitpicking here, but I think he has an even higher ceiling as a wide receiver, which is not to say that the ceiling is not really high at corner, but I just think the wide receiver skills are truly special, and the run after catch ability, the instincts, I would just say the understanding of space on the field, all that really shines through when you're watching Travis on top of the natural ball skills, obviously the great speed as well. I can't wait to see him in person. It'll be my first exposure in person to him playing football, even if it's just catching passes, which still to be determined, but I think there's a chance he'll catch some from Shador in just a few hours here, just to witness somebody who seems like he was, came out of the womb ready to do exactly this. So as a corner as well, the rare instincts, again, the ball skills, a lot of the same stuff applies on both sides of the ball skill set wise, right? No surprise here, but he probably runs routes better for receivers when he's playing defensive back than the receivers do themselves. So football IQ is off the charts, and probably the most, I think, underrated part of Travis's portfolio as a player is there's a special character element here, because to play 110 plus snaps per game, you hit over 300 more than any other player in the FBS last season. And you've got guys that played 16 games last year because of the 12-team playoff. So Ohio State played 4 playoff games. Guys like that who are playing maybe 4 extra games compared to Travis, to still have that many more snaps than anybody else speaks to determination. Right? If he didn't care enough, he wouldn't be able to do this, and he does care enough. He's got an immense determination. So I think that while the prospect has been discussed a ton, not sure the human has been discussed enough surrounding Travis Hunter.
Travis Hunter, he's the man. He's the man. Number one is I wouldn't have. I mean, I guess I wouldn't have not put him there, but
number one on a big board is different than number one where you're going to be drafted, because quarterbacks skew that board.
I was going to say that the quarterback situation always makes it tough.
But basically it's saying I would take him over Abdul Carter. Not that Abdul Carter's not going to be really good. It makes almost no sense for Cleveland to draft Abdul Carter at 2, because they already have Myles Garrett back in the fold on the biggest deal for a defensive player ever. And so I think that Travis to Cleveland at 2 does make a lot of sense. And he's got Jerry Jeudy there, an elite route runner, Pro Bowler last year that he can work with on offense. He's got Denzel Ward, a Pro Bowl corner, on the other side. So he'll have someone that's in his same stratosphere, if you will, on both sides of the ball that he can spend time with in terms of working on technique. Because, the criticism of Jerry Jeudy here were mostly production and sometimes attitude, but it wasn't about his work ethic.
No.
We've always seen videos of him running routes, and Travis runs routes similarly. They're built kind of similarly. Travis is maybe a little taller, and maybe just a little bit bigger, but
they're both
super
lanky.
skinny legs, lanky. And it was funny because Travis Hunter was wearing his Adidas shirt. It says something about Travis Hunter on the front, and then on the back just says Hunter.
It's kind of sick. He's got a pretty cool name. I love it.
Well, and that's the thing too, is I didn't even think about that, but Adidas should make some sort of like cool hunting, like
camo should be camouflage,
camo stuff, and just a whole campaign about how he's hunting the football or hunting
100%.
DBs or hunting whatever. But I mean, Andrew Berry, going all the way back to the combine, the GM of the Browns, said Travis Hunter, we envision him as a receiver. I talked to a prominent defensive coordinator in the league who said I would play him at receiver first, because that's the hardest thing to do, is catch a football and put it in the end zone. It is a dependent position, as Champ pointed out. You can affect the game at corner just by shutting down one half of the field, making a play in the run game, finding a loose ball on the ground, playing a ball that gets tipped in the air. But the best receiver in the world is only going to be as good as the quarterback that can get them the football.
Yeah, absolutely.
Nonetheless, there's a reason Jamar Chase is making $40 million, and PS2 and Jalen Ramsey and soon to be Sauce are all in that 25-ish million range.
Yeah. Well, I want to wrap the title of this. We are going to be talking about why do good coaches get fired. So we're going to wrap things up here, but we do have draft coverage that we're going to be having, and the draft is right around the corner.
2 weeks from tonight is round 1.
2 weeks from tonight. So in this time period, really quick, BK, and we'll wrap things up and then start talking about drawing parallels between coach the Denver Nuggets and the NFL, because we just had a good coach get fired and it happens all the time. What are teams doing in this time period? What do you expect in the next 2 weeks from the NFL?
So it's a combination of really two things, and maybe it's a third if they fly to a private workout with the player. And that's mostly teams that are looking at quarterbacks. So do the Titans fly down to Miami one more time to check out Cam Ward? Does a team fly to wherever Jackson Dart's training? I want to say he's a SoCal kid, if I'm not mistaken. Or he's definitely from California. So do you fly to wherever he's training? He may be training in Mississippi or Florida. I don't know. You're doing that. You're Zooming with a guy, if you want one last chance to check with him. You're bringing in the rest of your top 30 visits over the next, not even the full 2 weeks. You'll be done with that probably by a week from today.
Yeah.
And then you're spending a lot of time kind of throughout the process. If you're the team, they do it in spurts, but they do mock drafts, and they have different people represent a team. They let the computer do it, but they kind of go through the mechanics. They do some of that as they get closer to the draft, but really the timing of stuff and making sure they know, okay, if this team's on the board, who are the people that we're closest with in that building? So if it's the Jets, that's obvious. If the Jets are up, and not even at 7, but if the Jets pick in the 2nd or 3rd round is one you might be interested in moving up for, okay, who's calling Mooj first? Or are we reaching out to Aaron Glenn? Or is Sean hitting Aaron Glenn at the exact same time George is texting Darren Muji? That type of stuff. Is George Payton texting his nephew Robbie, who's now with Mooj with the Jets? So you're making sure that you have all that in order. And then it's just kind of reaffirming your draft board, which is something they don't ever change. Once they set it,
right,
they don't change it. So they have a preliminary front board, and then their back board is really their draft board. But the front board is before the combine. The back board is kind of in the last week or two that they've had it set. And maybe they waited until after that pro day and they set it Friday after or Monday. It doesn't change between now and then. Now you'll take names off. You'll be like, you know what? So-and-so just got in a fight with his girlfriend. Let's just take the name off. And so you have different coloring next to him.
Right. Did you hear about Tyreek Hill today?
I saw that he and his wife had another dispute.
And I guess she filed for divorce.
Well, it only took 5 kids from other women in the time they've been together.
I'm literally getting ready this morning and I'm like, listen, I don't want to prey on people's downfall, but it's not like I'm shocked by this news that she's getting a divorce. I mean, I said, I'm pretty certain if I did the math, some of those kids by other women fell in the timeline of their relationship. So she's better than me because I would have been gone a long time ago.
Yeah, and she is the sister of Kenny Vaccaro, who played in the league for a bunch of years from Texas.
Well, let's get back into the NFL conversations. As you guys know, and BK and I will be live again in about an hour to talk a little bit more in depth about what the Denver Nuggets have been up to this week. I feel exhausted by all of the things they've been pulling, all the stunts they've been pulling, if you will. But let's get into the coaches and the fact that we do a lot of the times, BK, across all major sports, see a pretty high coach turnover rate in terms of if a team's not successful, if the roster feels like it's being wasted, you see good coaches get fired. Now, uniquely with the Denver Nuggets, we're finding out more and more each day that there was a lot of beef and drama, tension on the backside of the business that we really couldn't see. We weren't privy to just watching games, but a lot of it does explain how this season has unfolded. And I want to just create the conversation first because this is what we're seeing with the Denver Nuggets. How important do you think it is for the front office and the coach to be on the same page?
Extremely.
And we're seeing that with the Nuggets right now. When you're not on the same page, it's extremely detrimental. But even more so, I think what we see a lot of the time is in football and basketball, doesn't matter. When the front office and the coach are not on the same page, I think we typically know who is going to be collateral damage if things can't get ironed out. And it's probably not going to be the front office. It's likely to be the coach. So can you think of an example in the NFL where front office and coach, have we ever seen a general manager and a coach be fired in the same day in the NFL?
Bill Belichick.
Yeah.
Is that cheating?
I mean,
so the NFL, it's easier to draw a straight line,
right?
In the 4 things you need, the 4 pillars to truly have the best shot at winning, and you may still not get it for a number of reasons. But solid ownership that isn't going to meddle too much. That's what makes Dallas its own confusing setup. But so a solid owner, like a Bob Kraft, like what we're seeing from Greg Penner, like what John Mara typically is, or Art Rooney with the Steelers. Owner, a GM that's on solid footing, that is on the same page with the head coach, and they have the franchise quarterback in the fold. And so if you have that, then you're in pretty good shape.
Yeah.
You're almost always going to pick the star player over the coach, except for it took a while, but Belichick was finally able to get them to move on from Tom Brady, or wore Tom Brady down, where he was able to go to Bob Kraft and say, I just don't want to be here anymore. And because Belichick ran the football operation and was a head coach, Belichick, in theory, won that power struggle, but Tom Brady ultimately has a scoreboard because he went and immediately won a Super Bowl in Tampa.
Yeah, did he?
But in the NBA, the player almost always wins. That's why LeBron gets new coaches every other year. That's why Ja Morant is going to have a new coach. And we could go through some other examples. LeBron's just the most obvious. That's why Doug Collins didn't lead the Bulls to 6 championships. Phil Jackson did, because Michael Jordan didn't get along with Doug Collins by the end of it, because Doug's a coach that grinds on you. And so
do you believe that quarterbacks have the same level of power as in the NBA?
Yes, 100%.
Okay.
If Joe Burrow went right now if you went to dinner with Mike Brown or called up Mike Brown's like, you know what? I just can't work with Zach Taylor. Then
bye, Zach.
See you later, Zach. And Mike Brown may get there on his own, and Duke Tobin, who runs their player personnel, and Mike Brown's wife, daughter, Katie Blackburn, is very involved in the day-to-day and will essentially take over for her dad. But no, he could do that if Josh Allen called up the Pagulas. And the Pagulas are kind of like Stephen Ross, who owns the Dolphins. They're not in town a lot. And Miami's a cool place to hang out, but Stephen Ross is just in New York a lot. He's not around the facility every day. So he gives his team president and Chris Greer a lot of autonomy. Right. But if Tua went in and is like, you know what, it's just not worth it working with Mike McDaniel, I think they'd move on from Mike McDaniel. They may end up moving on from the Denver native anyway. It's rare, though. Well, and you talk about it here. Mike Shanahan was never called the GM, but he might as well have been. When he got fired, that was it happening in the same day. But I think you do see that with some more frequency in the NFL than you do in the NBA, where it's a full clean house. Like, we need a new GM and a new coach. Saw it with the Jets this year. You don't see it in the NBA as often, and it feels like GMs just don't get fired as quickly in the NBA as they do in the NFL.
At all. I do think there's a little bit more grace in the NBA for front offices, which is ironic because I feel like there's quite a few front offices in the NBA that aren't as basketball minded as people would like.
Well, I get
that. I think that's where it kind of gets disgruntled sometimes between coach and front office, where it's like, what do you know? Or like, sit down. Like but in the NFL, it feels a little bit different in that way.
So here's the difference too that we've seen, because other than John Elway and now John Lynch, I'll have to rack my brain, and I'm not trying to pick on like Darren Muji, who was on a practice squad.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily always have great players that work their way up to GM jobs in the NFL. You have guys that are scouts that work their way up and eventually become GMs. I'm not saying they didn't all play,
right,
at Incarnate Word or Sacred Heart or these little schools, but you don't have, Steve Young's not working his way up to GM. We can just keep going down the list, but any of those Dallas stars, Emmitt Smith, Moose Johnson, they never became Troy Aikman, aren't GMs. Now, are they always like, oh, I'd consider that when you see what Elway and Lynch have done, but those are the exceptions. The NBA is filled with former players. Calvin Booth played for a decade in the league. You could go kind of Sean Marks won championships with the Spurs. He runs the Nets. We could just keep going. So your GM at least understands the players in a lot of instances. Elton Brand ran the Sixers for a bunch of years, more than you get in the NFL. But we've seen the NBA do a much better job of having former players and really good former players coach for a long. Jason Kidd's a Hall of Fame player.
I think where they drop the ball is the business side of things sometimes.
In terms of you're saying the GM doesn't understand.
It's not that they don't understand. I think sometimes maybe I'm using Denver as a very specific example where sometimes your emotional loyalty outweighs business decisions that you should or shouldn't make.
I think the question is, and if Josh talks tomorrow, the decision to let KCP go, and we understand why, or Bruce Brown, or even a Jeff Green, it becomes financial. But the NBA is set up to where you can keep paying your own players. You just go into a second and third salary.
And how is the NFL different in that way?
The NFL there's a salary cap. So there's no penalty. Like, you can't say, hey, you know what? We drafted Bo Nix. We drafted Cortland Sutton. We drafted Marvin Mims. We drafted PS2. We're just going to keep. So our salary is really $300 million, even though salary cap's $220.
Yeah.
In the NBA, you can pay a luxury tax essentially, and you get into these aprons. And Josh Kroenke's come out and been critical of it, saying you can't really add players in that scenario unless it's a Russell Westbrook or through a
minimum deal.
Yeah, or through a complicated trade. But you can't keep paying your own guys once they're on your roster. There's ways around that. And they didn't want to pay KCP, or he wanted a lot more money. Same with Bruce Brown. But the one thing Stan and Josh will tell you is you can't buy a ring. So my question for Josh, if he talks, and we'll see if he talks tomorrow, is how willing are you to go into that second and third apron, which we saw, it wasn't even called it or structured like that, but the Warriors were paying like $300 million a couple years ago in annual salary when they had Kevin Durant, or when they won that fourth championship or whatever it was. But they were willing to do that for a ring.
Yeah.
The Eagles are willing to extend themselves. The Niners were too. They just didn't get the ring, where you kind of screw yourself on the cap. And so how much of the decision making, including the Jamal Murray contract, MPJ contract, were those Josh Kroenke calls, or were those Tim Conley in the case of MPJ, or was it Calvin Booth saying we have to do this and Josh agreeing versus Josh saying,
I think there's always going to be risk when you fire a good coach, always. And then there's the fear aspect of seeing that good coach go somewhere else and do really great things because they are a good coach. So I think we see it across all major sports. BK and I will jump into the basketball side of this a little bit more in about an hour. But from the football perspective, I do think we've seen this before in recent memory. Has there been a coach firing that has been like, I do not understand that? Because I do think there's a lot of Nuggets fans right now that are going, what in the world were we thinking? In recent memory, who is that coach in the NFL?
It's easy because it's the guy that we started talking about right off the top. It's Mike Vrabel. He has the Titans in the playoffs a bunch of years. They end up moving on from longtime GM John Robinson, who traded A.J. Brown essentially without asking Mike Vrabel.
Yeah.
And Vrabel kind of wins that power struggle. Their owner lives in Houston. That's another situation. So Amy Adams Strunk, and she may have dropped the Strunk because I think she got divorced. But Amy Adams is in Houston most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So she's not there every day. And then they move on from John Robinson. Vrabel's frustrated about that. They end up bringing Rand Carthen from the Niners. He has a big personality, and he ends up winning the power struggle to get Vrabel out. Well, a year later, they move on from Rand too. But Mike Vrabel was the number one coach on everybody's list this year.
Yep.
And last year, I don't know why he ended up not getting a gig right away. And I can't even remember how the interview processes went and when they fired him exactly. But he took the year off. And Mike Vrabel's a hell of a coach. And you understand what the Patriots have if Drake May ends up being the guy with a bunch of salary cap space and understanding. I think that's one of the big reasons that video is out there today, is just to let people know, hey, this isn't Bill Belichick's Patriots anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be reasonable people in the modern world. I'm sure that's got to be, in general, a challenge for Bill Belichick.
I was going to say tough for him to see.
Well, no, for Bill Belichick, I'm just thinking beyond that to Carolina. Bill Belichick's been on more social media posts in the last 3 months than he has in the last
doing yoga
30
with his
years.
Young girlfriend.
Well, the girlfriend thing's part of it, and I think that's just to show that he's young. Honestly, I think that's why he's signing off on that.
He's a young soul, yeah.
But the pictures he's taking with high school kids over and over and over, I'm not saying he didn't take those before, but they just didn't mean anything.
Right.
Now it's like, here's Bill Belichick. If Bill Belichick's not on the draft covers this weekend or in 2 weeks, I will be totally shocked. I bet he's either on ESPN, NFL Network, or somehow on both. Just like we saw David Shaw every year.
Yeah.
But my point being, Mike Vrabel got let go, and you're like, what the hell? Because most of them you do kind of see coming. Belichick getting let go, we knew that was at the end of its rope.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that surprise you when really good coaches get let go and you don't think they've finished the job. Jimmy Johnson in Dallas for Barry Switzer's probably at the highest, most ridiculous one that you can think of. Because like Belichick got fired in Cleveland, they were trending up. He was better at a second stop. Pete Carroll gets fired by the Jets. He's better at a second stop in Seattle. Or I guess maybe he was Patriots too. Whatever it was. You're usually better. Andy Reid was great with the Eagles, even better with the Chiefs. Mike Shanahan gets fired by the Raiders, was great here. And so I think that in the NFL, sometimes coaches second and watch, if they win a Super Bowl, nobody wants to see the Patriots do it. You're like, well, Vrabel was better at a second stop by winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah. I think too, the the confusion of what we see with happening with the Nuggets, and we'll dive into that more later, of course, but is the timing of it. And I do think things have to get pretty stinking bad to fire a coach, not just mid-season, but late season.
It never happens in the NFL like this with good teams.
I was just going to say, right. And I was just going to say, what also makes it so weird is a 4 seed in the West, firing your coach with 3 games left makes you think like Nathaniel Hackett mode. There is no hope. Can't even, play clocks out. He wasn't on the same planet as the city of Denver. So it just was not going to work regardless. But the team was also bad. To have a good team in the NFL with 3 regular season games left and you fire your coach, that I think would cause quite a bit of rumblings and chaos amongst the league. Like none of us are safe. Nobody's safe. If a good team can have their coach fired at the end of the regular season, we just don't see that in the NFL when it comes to good teams. Bad teams, maybe. You've got to pull in Nathaniel Hackett and say, you're done, dude. You're done. We got to move on. But late in the season with so few games left and a team that's the 4th in the West, I mean, they've had a streaky year, the Nuggets, yes, but they're still a good team. So that's where it gets very complicated. And I'm trying to draw parallels in that sense to the NFL, but it's tough because we just don't see that when it comes to teams that are still competing.
I just wanted, because I didn't, even the other day when this happened, I didn't really, other than the Jimmy Johnson thing, just immediately popped to mind. It is Bill Belichick at the end of his rope. It is Mike Shanahan. It is even the great Tom Landry in Dallas. New owner comes in. They're a bad team. They only have 3 wins. Well, the next year they win 1 game. So it was actually worse. But they had moved on from the great Tom Landry, who's the only coach in the history of the Cowboys to that point. From 1960 on, until 1989. That's pretty wild, that 30 seasons. But coaches do get fired after having good years in the NFL every now and then. And Vrabel didn't have a great year in his last year, but he'd been in the playoffs a couple years before that. Mariucci had 10 wins when he got fired with the Niners. Bum Phillips was 11-5 when the Oilers moved on from Wade's dad. George Seifert, who had won a Super Bowl with a lot of Bill Walsh players, obviously, but had won 2 Super Bowls. I'm sorry. He gets fired after a 12-win season in 96. But the point being, all of these, Brian Flores was fired after 10 games. Well, they were 10-6, then 9-8. Tony Dungy, 11 wins, 10 wins, 9 wins. He gets fired. They bring in John Gruden, and the Bucks win a Super Bowl with with Tony Dungy's team, essentially, and his defense and those players. 4 Hall of Famers on that defensive side of the ball. No Hall of Famers on offense.
So I guess in those situations, would you say that there was that was a battle of front office versus coach?
100%.
Yeah. So we do see it. It's just not as common.
Well, and certainly not in December.
Really common, I think, for either sport, really. I mean, we're starting to see it happen more.
But we're not seeing it with teams on the cusp of the playoffs, and we've seen it twice in the NBA. But to be fair about the NBA, we haven't seen this since 1981, where a coach was...
I think it's feeling so magnified right now because it happened with the Grizzlies a week ago and it happened with the Nuggets this week. It feels like it's happening much more often than it is. But again, those examples that you just named, 10-win seasons, 12-win seasons, Super Bowls.
But all after the season.
Of course. But the timing was different. That being said, those were probably the result of front office and coach not seeing eye to eye. And it does, again, just magnify the value of having a front office that is in support and fully backs a head coach and vice versa. You have to have trust there. And if that trust is broken, I think we know who is going to be collateral damage in that situation in the NFL more often than in the NBA. In this situation, we're seeing both with the Nuggets, but it typically, in most situations, I think the coach is the one that becomes collateral damage, even if the front office has played their role.
And football's different than basketball in that if you fire your GM in football, that is your entire scouting staff and your entire front office, how it's structured, and all of your pre-draft stuff.
Yeah.
Where you've had scouts
it's a little more complicated.
2 years working on this year's draft class. When I say 2 years, they're always working 2 years out.
Right.
Because they're looking at who's draft eligible this year and who might be draft eligible next year, or who will be draft eligible and might come out. NIL is going to change things a little bit, I think, where we'll see just a handful of guys that will stick back because they want to win a championship at wherever and have a chance to come back. And do that with $1 million in their pocket versus nothing. But in general, so the second you do that, you're having to change, not really necessarily your whole philosophy, but You then have to go top to bottom. Is this person a good football person that understands my vision as the GM and or the head coach and our shared vision? So the Jets being a good example, Aaron Glenn comes in. Obviously, they've got some good pieces there. We've seen it, especially on defense, and Robert Saleh showed that in the last couple of years. Joe Douglas, as part of that, has drafted some good players. They just haven't really got the quarterback right. They missed on the Aaron Rodgers thing working, and they missed on Zach Wilson before that.
Yeah.
So Darren Mucci has to come in. Yeah, he brought Robbie Payton with him, but he can't fire all the Dolphins scouts. You can fire, Dolphins, Jets scouts. You can't fire all you can fire all the coaches, because you'll find a corner coach, you'll find a linebackers coach, you find O-line coaches. They all just rotate, but you'll know guys you worked with, so you can fire the whole coaching staff. You can't realistically fire all of your scouts, because unless you are just some savant that's like, I know all 300 players in this draft because I've been working on it at my old job, you're going to need the opinions of your Southeast scout and your Southwest scout and your Northwest scout. And so in football, it makes it harder. In basketball, you're only drafting 2 or 3 players. And I'm not trying to minimize it.
No, but it's different.
But Calvin Booth also, I think, had the job because he was there with Tim Connolly, and you just didn't need to rock the boat.
Right.
Well, now that you're seeing Calvin Booth isn't working great with his head coach, the winningest head coach of all time, let's just go reset anyway. Because the one thing we do have, the best player in basketball, some other pieces, but let's get a new voice in here.
So it really is circumstantial. I think in an NFL situation, tying this back over to football, if in an NFL situation, if you've got a head coach that's not seeing eye to eye with the front office, given how a front office is structured in the NFL differently than the NBA, you probably wouldn't go ahead and fire a general manager over a dispute between the GM and the coach. But you also, again, if it starts to trickle into the team and you've got a Joe Burrow that says, hey, I can't work with this guy, that obviously creates motivation for the general manager to make some things change and to shake some things up. So hitting a reset button in any team for any sport is not easy. The Nuggets are going through that right now. We know that the Broncos maybe for some time needed to go through that, but now they've got a good handle on their coaching staff and the ownership and the players, the cultures being established. But at the end of the day, this all, to me, when you see good coaches get fired, I think the baseline of where that all stems from is the culture is not where it needs to be. And it's either something that the coach is doing or isn't doing. It's either, maybe it's a dispute between the coach and the GM, whatever the reason. If the culture is off, it's pretty tough to win. It's pretty tough to see success. It's tough to win rings and championships. So yeah, good culture matters.
And when a coach and GM come in together, because of the stuff I was talking about, how your football front office and scouting staff is set up, a GM oftentimes is going to get a little more leeway in that, unless you just hate some of the decisions they've made or the way they've drafted, and the owner's always going to sign off on the top draft pick or a team president or whatever, a GM's going to get more leeway to hire a second coach typically, unless it's just been such a disaster with the personnel and how they evaluate personnel, or if the coach is such a strong personality, like John Gruden got Mike Mayock fired essentially more than Mike Mayock got. I mean, John Gruden obviously got let go. But here, Sean Payton probably could get George Payton fired if you wanted down the road, not right away, because a lot of people are like, oh, if Sean moves on from George, that's Greg Penner saying we acquiesce to everything that Sean would want. Now, it turns out they work really well together. But I think about Tom Telesco, who just got fired by the Raiders. He got to hire like 3 head coaches in his time with the Chargers. But normally a GM, as long as they're not an abject disaster, even if they come in with the head coach or even a little after, they're going to get a chance to hire a next head coach or help spearhead that process with the
be a
owner.
part of the process.
And it'll be interesting to see the way the Nuggets approach this, because they already have coaches on staff, including David Adelman, that will get a good look. But if they bring in an outside GM and don't promote from within, and I think they will go outside, does that GM have a coach that they think will be the perfect fit for Joker and the rest of these pieces? And what's their vision for Joker? And will it align with, and is there a coach Joker wants that he's worked with before? And so that's where the star player often gets consulted, but not all the time. And I think in this case, Joker will on the basketball side, but
Joker's
on the football
the quarterback
side,
of his team.
for sure. But on the football side, I'm trying to think like where there's a good quarterback that has a new head coach in recent years. And there aren't too many of them where it's like Josh Allen hasn't gotten one, Joe Burrow, Lamar, I guess Jalen Hurts. But,
I was going to say the Eagles, relatively new,
but that was, that was Carson Wentz and Nick Foles winning with Peterson.
Yeah.
Hurts was just coming along when Sirianni's now come in. If they were to move on again, if they were to move on from Sirianni, Hurts would at least get a phone call from Howie Roseman kind of thing. But in general, you don't have that.
Yeah.
In the NFL, where the good quarterbacks they're locked in with their coaches for the most part.
Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid, they've been locked in for a minute.
Yeah, Lamar and
talk about being committed to your.
But 7 years with McDermott now, and he's not an offensive coach, but clearly Josh Allen at least has his back.
Cool thing about the Commanders is Jaden Daniels and the coach kind of came into a program together to reestablish a culture and kind of do things their way, which was awesome. So that's a cool little spin on like getting a rookie quarterback and then also getting some changes in your coaching staff. And it's like a full rebrand, and it worked very well for them.
And Sean Payton didn't need to rebrand anything. Dan Quinn's resume isn't Sean Payton's by any means, but he went to a Super Bowl and was a really good defensive coach at every stop along the way and really well liked.
Yeah.
Sean Payton isn't necessarily as well liked, although you don't hear players.
He's just a little stubborn.
But you don't hear players critical of Sean.
No.
Very. He does a good job of taking care of his players. And so Drake May's in that same boat, although he was there a year before Vrabel.
Yeah.
And obviously they have a winning culture that's only had a few years of downturn. But Bo and Sean kind of have that now, where Sean will get to grow with Bo.
Yeah.
But in 5 years, and I made this comment, Scott didn't want to hear about it when he and Nate were on the show on Tuesday, that I was like, Patrick Mahomes could get Andy Reid fired. That would never happen. It's like, well, no, if he were to go to Clark Hunt and say, I can't work with Andy, he's too old school in his thinking, Patrick Mahomes would win that battle if it mattered. Joe Burrow can get Zach Taylor fired. Josh Allen can get Sean McDermott fired. Jalen Hurts probably can get Nick Sirianni fired because Jalen Hurts is the quarterback that won the Super Bowl. I don't know if like Matt Stafford can get Sean McVay fired. Who's the kid in San Fran? Brock Purdy. Oh, I said Brady. Brock Purdy. He can't get Kyle fired. But true star quarterbacks, maybe Tua can't get Mike McDaniel fired. I don't know.
I don't think he could.
CJ Stroud could maybe get D'Amico Ryans fired, as crazy as that sounds.
I'd be sad about that.
I think that everybody in Houston would be too. And I don't.
Yeah, I'd be sad.
But it's like, where does the QB have enough juice to get a guy fired?
That's how you know who your top. If your quarterback could get your coach fired, you have a top 5 quarterback.
Yeah, because Caleb Williams didn't get
right.
Eberflus fired.
I don't think Brock Purdy could get Kyle Shanahan fired. That's where we start going into top 5 conversations.
In 3 years, Caleb Williams may be able to get Ben Johnson fired if that's not working. And I use the example here. You got this helmet there. You got one right over your head. There was not a lot of mystery around why Dan Reeves was fired after going to a few Super Bowls, because he and number 7 just weren't on the same page. And so then Wade Phillips got a chance, and then it was the Mike Shanahan show, and that obviously propelled them to those 2 rings.
Yeah.
But that's how you know is who has the most juice. But it is fascinating to go team by team and say, okay, is it the coach or is it the front office? Like Howie Roseman has way more juice than Nick Sirianni because of the teams that he's built over the last decade plus. Here, Sean Payton still has more juice. Kyle Shanahan, for as good as John Lynch is, Kyle, I think, has more juice, but that doesn't mean that there's not a scenario where Kyle would get fired and John would keep his job.
Right. That's an interesting one.
That dynamic, and part of it is they have a younger owner in Jed York who runs the day-to-day, but Jed's involved, not to the point where, other than he listened to Rand Carthen, and that's why they took Trey Lance instead of Mac Jones. But I don't think Jed at this point, after 8 years, is going to be like, well, Kyle, maybe you're right. Maybe it's time to move on from John.
Right.
Whereas if John said, hey, I think the message is stale, that's where the front office wins, is that there's no message from the front office to the team. If you're like, these players just aren't listening. Look, they're checked out. You go in the locker room and they're not listening to the coach. Like, just go stand there. Or
at that point, the coach has to go. They've no longer got the locker room.
And that's where a GM can where the GM has the autonomy. The other side of it is like the way Brian Flores got fired. And it turns out a lot of people there's plenty of stories out there, had issues with his personality in Miami. Chris Greer, like I mentioned, Stephen Ross never comes down to Miami except on game day. Chris Greer sits with Stephen Ross in the suite. So when the GM's just feeding you whatever the messaging is that he wants, he's got a better chance to keep his job. And he did.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're going to maybe spend some time next week. We can spend some time breaking down who's got the juice, coach or GM, for every team in the NFL. But of course, the draft 2 weeks from today, and Guerrilla Sports will have you covered on all things draft content. We're getting closer to that. So there will be plenty more football to talk about in the coming weeks. So make sure you are subscribed to the Guerrilla Sports YouTube and following us on all things socials. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Liv Moods. That's Brandon Krisztal. And this has been another Guerrilla Sports Off Field presented by Trusted American Mortgage. You can head to trustedamerican.com to see how they can help you save some money today. Shout out to our friends at Trusted American, and we'll see you guys next week.